it kind of started off good, and we're about to get a few days of rain, which is kind of weird, but here we go.
Has it been a drought there like it has been everywhere else?
Well, up actually, Missoula is kind of the dividing line between what was a pretty minimal winter last year, snowpack, and then everything south of here seemed to do okay to amazing down obviously in California. We were okay, and then the summer wasn't too crazy, not too many wildfires, so we can't complain too much. See how this winter goes. We're just kind of starting our water year right now.
Did you get on any big trips in the summer?
Yeah, so I went back to Ecuador and joined up with Willie Hankel and Diego Robles, and we pulled off a tributary to the Zamora called the Rio Negro, and did an Andean crossing to get there. It was pretty turned into a pretty savage mission. It was 8 or 9 days. Everything went pretty well. Willie took a swim. It was his first time getting pinned with his head underwater, so that was all kind of frightening for us. Yeah, and in the middle of a canyon, in the middle of a sequence of pretty big rapids, so it was concerning. And then we were able to kind of rally and figure it out as a team. And Diego made some pretty high-fee parkour maneuvers.
You're always doing that savage stuff. I was watching a video of you this morning where you're going down like a 200-foot canyon with pulleys and everything. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's my passion in the sport. I certainly don't claim to be, a freestyle kayaker or a racer or anything like that. I'm just really into the expedition and exploration side of the sport, which is kind of it's a different aspect of the sport, which is cool. There's a lot of different ways that people enjoy whitewater kayaking, and I guess the remote expedition stuff is just one of them.
How'd you get into it?
Yeah, so I guess it was just my freshman year in college. I went to Western State University. I grew up in Colorado, grew up in Greeley, Colorado, which is a lot more like a Midwestern town than what a lot of people think Colorado is. It's just out on the Front Range. But my dad was a skier, so he had taught me how to ski when I was growing up, and we'd do a few weekends out of the year going up into the mountains. So I just really fell in love with the mountains and fell in love with skiing, and that's why I went to Western State in Gunnison. I really just wanted to go up there, work as a lift operator, work on the mountain, and ski and enjoy the mountain lifestyle. And it just so happened that my college roommate had a pink kayak setting up in the corner, and it's just this like really funny looking, not very I don't know, it looked super old school. I'd definitely seen kayaking maybe on National Geographic or some of those programs growing up, but I'd never been in a kayak. I'd been whitewater rafting once, I think, growing up, so I just really wasn't familiar with the river. And that same roommate and I were up at Crested Butte one day on a weekend, and it was like 2 feet of powder, and I was just like, man, it doesn't get any better than this. And that's when he told me I had to try whitewater kayaking. He thought it was the most exciting thing that he'd ever done. And the next opportunity I got, February, I think it was late February, we went down to Moab, Utah, took a big road trip amongst a group of friends, and I got my first experience in the river in a ducky. And it was, I mean, just that whole idea of changing elevation. February in Colorado is still as cold, but going down to 4,000 feet out into the desert, the daytime temps were up into the 50s, and it was amazing. It was almost like a little mini tropical vacation. And then, we camped out that night because we were I think it was like 3 or 4 hours to get there from the mountains of Colorado. And then it went down to like 5 degrees that night. It was probably the closest I've ever been to hypothermia. So all in all, it was a huge adventure, just like kind of a mind-boggling thought of, being on the river in the wintertime, and the warmth of the day and the coldness of the night, and the waves of the river. The whole thing was pretty eye-opening.
Some people would call that insane.
Yeah, totally. And if I would have really thought it through, if any of us, I think, would have thought it through, I don't think anybody had that great of a night. We had plenty of beer, but not nearly enough warmth and sleeping bag. So we all got caught pretty off guard. But yeah, if we would have known that it was going to be 5 degrees at night, if we would have checked the weather forecast, I don't know. It kind of marked the tenor for the rest of my kayaking career, which was just kind of like, just don't sweat the details too much. Just go for it, and inevitably whatever happens out there is going to be exciting.
And you'll figure it out as you go.
Figure it out as you go. Yeah.
So how do you find and vet people to go with?
Well, in those early days, it was that friend group at a Western State college. And there's, whitewater kayaking it's a really niche sport, I guess, a small sport. We do get a lot of, I think we get more than our fair share of attention and media, just because I think the aesthetics are pretty crazy, especially in terms of like big waterfalls and whatnot. But the actual number of participants is much smaller than skiing or mountain biking or other activities. They just have a lot more people that do it. So the group of people in Gunnison, Colorado that were practicing at that exploratory level or adventurous level, or wanted to kind of push into the realm of class 5 hard, dangerous whitewater, is pretty small. So that kind of defined who I was paddling with there. And then in each one of, I guess from there on, there's a series of events that just sort of led me to a place where I decided I wanted to just try to spend as much of my life as I could chasing rivers. One thing that happened was I broke my femur, which kind of ended my ski career. However, temporarily, it definitely put me in a place where maybe a month or a month and a half after I had the surgery to repair that femur fracture, I was able to get in the kayak and roll the kayak. So I was still able to go out into the wilderness, and I just really started to fall in love with it. And yeah, one thing led to another, and it was just it's been a series of crews, but not that many, for someone who's spent now 25 years of my life kayaking in a big way, not just, but really trying to dedicate my entire life to it. I've probably only had 4 or 5 crews that I've really gone out with. And, I'm not someone who just goes around and boats with a bunch of different people in general. It's usually the same crews. I boated for a long time with a friend of mine out of Oregon named Chris Korbulik, and a friend that we made in Brazil, Pedro Oliva. We ended up working together for, the better part of a decade, from the late 2000s to the mid 2000 teens, boating all over the world. So I spent a good 10 years of my kayaking career boating with those guys. Prior to that, the original crew that was some mixture of the guy who taught me how to kayak, my college roommate, and friends that we made in Southern Oregon when we decided that Gunnison, Colorado wasn't a great place to be a year-round whitewater kayaker. We ended up finding a scholarship program so we could pay in-state tuition and go to Southern Oregon, in Ashland, Oregon, and sort of further our whitewater kayaking careers there. And so we met with a great group of guys out of Southern Oregon that, again, I boated with those guys probably for 7 years, first 7 years of my paddling career. And
That's awesome.
yeah, so it's, and the other side of it is that I definitely have boated with random people from time to time, people that you just meet at the put-in, or even meet on the other side of the world. Say you travel to Ecuador to go paddle. And the amazing thing about that is that it's, you kind of, especially when you're on class 5, you really trust the people that you're on the river with to be your backup. If something goes wrong, your skirt implodes, if you have to swim, if you lose a kayak, there's just so many things where you're alone in your kayak. It's an individual sport in that way, But on the other side of things, when you're out in the middle of nowhere, and the middle of nowhere could literally be between where one road access was to another road access, like you kind of rely on your friends. Maybe you need a breakdown paddle out of their kayak. Maybe you need them to boat downstream and find your kayak for you, or you rely on their first aid kit. So many different things that come into play in terms of the downstream point A to point B kayaking being much more of a team endeavor than one might think when they think of whitewater kayaking. In general, we always paddle our own boats, but we oftentimes rely on help from our team when something goes wrong. And shoot, just when we're taking snacks and having picnics on our way down the river, it's nice to share food and share a few laughs, and be in this place that can be pretty scary, challenging, if not scary. And when you have like this friend group around you, everybody's sort of joking, but everybody's paying attention to each other. It's completely changes that dynamic.
Yeah, when I went down to Mexico, just having these are people I never met before, but I knew their skill level and that they could be trusted, and it made me so much more comfortable in rivers that I was scared out of my mind to do. And I was watching a video of Dane on the Indus, ironically running Ben Stookesberry, and him swimming out of it, and it showed the importance of having a team, because his team was right there to throw him a rope and get him off onto the shore, because that looks like a rapid that is pretty deadly if you really get messed up.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, and it doesn't even have to be like this monster rapid on the Indus. I mean, it could. I was going down a river alone in California one time. Not a whole lot of water, but the banks were just this really slippery, super smooth granite. And I was so lucky that I was able to get myself out of the river. It was very close to just basically drowning in the spot where the currents weren't that strong, but I just could not, for the life of me, get myself up this really slippery slope. And had there been one person there with a rope or a piece of webbing, or maybe even just a hand, would have been no problem, no worries at all. And I would have never even thought of that spot as being potentially, life threatening. So it's funny how, just one helping hand can make all the difference in the world, turn the situation just into, hey, it's because it's fun. Once you survive the swim, once something goes wrong, I mean, it's a really thrilling part of the sport to sort of, test your own ability and your comfort level and have some stress. And then when you get on the other side, be able to sort of laugh about it and try to learn from it a little bit. But yeah, it's obviously things can go badly and get out of control really quickly, especially when you're talking about drowning, which can just happen, in a matter of minutes.
What's the hardest thing about planning these trips for you?
Gosh, the hardest thing about planning the trips, I think, there are things in life where it's a process. You go from the dreaming stage or the inspiration stage, which oftentimes is talking to other paddlers, talking to, or maybe you see a magazine article that's not even about kayaking. Maybe it's in National Geographic or some nature magazine where you're inspired to see an exotic place, or you hear about a waterfall up in the mountains from a friend. And so I guess the more challenging part is just following that inspiration all the way through to completion, and not getting distracted, not having any children along the way to siphon off your funds and much needed free time. I mean, it's one thing to plan one trip and to follow it all the way through, but it's a whole different thing to spend 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years of your life continuing over and over again to go after these rivers, one after the other. And I think it's just a matter of maybe not having anything better to do with your life, or Or on the other hand, just having the freedom and the flexibility in order to, and the determination in order to follow some of these plans all the way through, and uh, not get dissuaded from people telling you that it's too dangerous or it's not worthwhile. That oftentimes that's can even be the more challenging than, say, showing up at the closest village to the river and them telling you that you're going to die. A lot of times, if you were down in Mexico, that might have happened to you. That can be sort of an inspiring situation. We're like, oh my God, this is going to be exciting, challenging. Like that they're not 100% familiar with what you're able to do in the kayak. An even more challenging thing could be just like your peer group being like, oh man, like go portage, or that's not going to be worthwhile. I really want to just go run some classics. Like I really want to go run this waterfall, this known quantity, and kind of at that point, just being able to say, okay, well, if that's not something that excites you and inspires you, I got to go find someone else to do it with me. Or if you can't find anyone else to do it with you, even going alone and trying to figure it out when you're on the ground there. So I guess for me, that's like the most challenging aspect, because when you actually get to the river and when you actually put in, it's, everything is working in your favor to go to the other side. Namely, the current pushing downstream. The easiest possible way to get yourself out of the situation is just to continue downstream and make it to the takeout. So it's really just a matter of making it to the put in, and once that's done, for me, in my experience, the hard part's behind you.
So you talked about, you were talking kind of like in this sport, kind of dreaming bigs. From the beginning, what's one big dream that you had in the sport that you were able to accomplish?
Gosh, that's a good question. I mean, the sport was so novel to me upon finding it, and it really, it was just it was kind of something for me that was every step was something novel and something new, and there was always a challenge. And in Colorado at that time, there were plenty of unknown quantities around, whether it was a river that had only been done a handful of times or a river that you didn't know had been done before. So that was always the spark of inspiration, was being able to look at and having at hand things that seem like either they hadn't been done before, or they hadn't been done in a long time, or they hadn't been documented. And I mean, immediately, the one thing that was on my radar, maybe right from the beginning, was that 100-foot waterfall, and the idea that the world record for the highest waterfall ever run just seemed to be so attainable. Especially once I had gone off my first 50 or 60-foot waterfall, I thought that it was within reach for me to get close to what was the world record at that time, which was, I guess it was the very end of the 90s, right at the beginning of the 2000s, was when Teo ran the 99-foot waterfall. That became a big motivation for me in the sport, was to try to run a 100-foot waterfall. And nowadays, that's a little different, at least from my perspective. It's almost double that now. 100, what is it? Almost 190 feet?
189, yeah.
189. I mean, that's a whole different ball game, both from just, I mean, certainly from the physics side of things, and the way that we accelerate due to gravity. So you're just going to be going so much faster when you hit the water, and so much more dangerous. And it's just so much harder to find that perfect. I mean, right now, the guys at the top end of the waterfall running game, they're looking for essentially a 200-foot waterfall to run. And it can't have rocks at the bottom, right? Obviously, it can. It has to have this smooth transition to vertical free fall. The things that we can get away with off of a 60, 70, 80-foot waterfall, you can't get away with them off of a waterfall that's going to be twice that big, because any flatness in your kayak or any amount of tuck that you don't have, it could rip you in half. So, the times are different, but I still think that, and luckily we're still in a time when there's, at least on the exploration side of things, there's so much left to be done. And it doesn't have to be the hardest river in the world. Like, there's still so many rivers left to be paddled, luckily. And, who knows, hopefully not, but we could be talking about a few decades from now, that might not be the case. I mean, the way that we're seeing rivers be dammed, especially in the Amazon basin, it's pretty frightening.
Yeah, that video you sent me about that was pretty eye-opening, and it made me angry because I'm like, you're taking away the livelihood of and the rivers that make these people so happy and come together.
Yeah, and it's especially, gosh, it's especially sad there because they do have such an amazing kayaking community that has grown up over the years since the first gringos went down there and kind of introduced the sport. There are dozens, if not hundreds of local paddlers there. And so many of them are river guides now, raft guides, kayak guides, making a good living. So it's frustrating for sure. And the same thing is happening on the Zambezi, which is crazy. I mean, that is like a holy grail for us whitewater kayakers. It's the Batoka Gorge of the Zambezi. Latest I've heard is that 2027 they're going to start construction on that Batoka Dam, which is going to almost flood the Zambezi up to the base of Victoria Falls.
Holy crap!
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And it's it's just now these villagers that have made their livelihoods and sustain themselves on the tourism industry. Just now they're starting to grow as accomplished whitewater kayakers and guides. And so, that's their backyard river is going to turn into a lake, which is insane to think about, losing that, because everybody, I think maybe that could be one commonality that we share as whitewater kayakers is we all want to go to the Zambezi. That's one of the places that I think we could all dream about.
Definitely. It's pretty amazing how much the sport does for so many people. And there's always something else you can do. You never stop chasing goals. It just doesn't all end one day.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like we've all experienced boating somewhere in South America. I know I've boated in Honduras. Like kind of like you were saying, the culture that, mind you, it's been I guess 2015 since I was there. So the culture wasn't as big as I'm assuming it is now. I'd love to experience it again. I know that when me and my wife were in Costa Rica at the beginning of the year, kind of the rafting and kayaking culture even there had gotten really big. And and I was kind of reading about some dam construction they were going to start doing in Costa Rica on some different rivers, and that's going to put a lot of good people out of fun and out of work. Kind of disheartening, and also that's not too far from home. I mean, that can happen here any day.
Yeah, it's true, but it's also so strange that here in the U.S. there's very little dam construction going on. Of course, like what was dammed, it all took place from the beginning of the 20th century through the early 80s for the most part. The TVA, of course, was a huge one, Tennessee Valley Authority, and then out west here with the Columbia River, those dams went in as a part of post World War I, World War II, and then post World War II, we put in some huge ones, especially Glen Canyon Dam at the top of the Grand Canyon, and then the largest earthen dam in the United States, which is Oroville Dam on the Feather River, went in the early 60s. And so, a lot of the dam construction that could have been done has already been done. And we just got lucky that, American Whitewater came along with their partners and came up with the Wild Scenic Rivers Act. Otherwise, the Middle Fork of the Feather wouldn't be there. The Locksaw wouldn't be free flowing. I mean, we're talking about the premier rivers in the United States protected by this Wild and Scenic Rivers Act that went in the early to mid 60s and really saved our asses in this country in terms of just completely out of control hydroelectric development. But even that, we're still dealing with the stark reality of losing the salmon population in the Columbia River Basin, and it's principally due to all the dams on the Columbia and the Snake Rivers.
Are there some river trips you've done that are now dammed up that you can't do anymore?
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the waterfalls that we were running down in Brazil with our buddy Pedro Oliva are no longer free flowing. That's a pretty popular way to generate hydroelectricity. In Brazil, for example, I believe like 80% of their electricity portfolio is from hydro, and it's all been just booming in the last 10 years in the Amazon. Is just obviously there's a lot of water, and then there's also gradients stacked up in these waterfalls. They just show up there and completely dewater the river, send the river through a pipe or through a canal around a big stretch of river and put it through a powerhouse. And the hydroelectric mafia around the world, they like to claim that that's clean energy. But what they're not taking into account, especially when they're building big dams in the Amazon, is how much rainforest is being flooded, and how in the tropics, when you have a reservoir, you're essentially causing that water to stagnate and causing a tremendous amount of pollution and disease. And you're also just putting a huge barrier for all those fish that used to travel upstream and downstream. So it's kind of head scratching, because you can see at this point what we're doing here in the United States is we're taking dams out. On the Klamath River, for example, this is going to be the largest dam removal in our planet's history, and we're going to see right in front of our eyes what it does for the salmon population that's almost been completely wiped out on the Klamath River. So that'll be pretty exciting.
Yeah, hopefully other countries see that and will follow suit.
Yeah, and it's the problem specifically in the Amazon basin is just the level of corruption. Those construction projects are just huge money makers, and so the construction companies themselves are paying off politicians left and right to let them go in and make the money. And to be fair, they're getting financing internationally because of the big push to decarbonize our electricity grids. It's really still not recognized on an international level just how damaging hydroelectricity actually is, and the fact that it's not a modern source of energy. We've had hydroelectricity around since the late 1800s, and in so many cases, it's not fair. I think it's not fair to say that in every case hydroelectricity is a bad option. Of course, it can be a good option, but certainly where they're doing it in these countries that have governments and politicians that are so susceptible to being paid off and corrupted, and there's really no regulation to make sure that they're, for example, keeping a certain amount of water in the river, not damaging and not taking advantage of the people who live along the river themselves. Like, you just can't guarantee that every single one of those hydroelectricity projects won't cause the same environmental and social damage that you see in that Rio Pasuno film that I showed you guys.
Yeah, and making sure it doesn't blow up.
Yeah, making sure the thing functions. Every time they have a catastrophe like that, they have to spend money, and who's paying for those repairs? At the end of the day, it's the people that are buying the electricity. So here in this country, it's you and me that pay for all of PG&E's. I guess the most famous offender here in the United States, at least in the Western United States, is PG&E over in California, that have been very much responsible for many of the huge wildfires and some of the really aging power lines that have fallen down in windstorms and caused these massive wildfires. You know, who's going to pay for, you know, all of those power lines to be put back up, and who's going to pay for the lawsuits? It's us at the end of the day, the people who buy the energy. So it's a bad deal.
Our
I mean,
books. Go ahead, Sam.
frankly, when you're in South America, I don't know if you've like ever noticed, but like their power grid's pretty dodgy anyway. I'm like doesn't seem super legit in certain places. So it's like, yeah, I could definitely see some of the issues that are to come with it.
Well, that's, you know, and that's a good point too. Let's be perfectly honest. Here in this country, for example, I'm just real familiar with the Ecuador situation, so I'll use that as an example. In this country, per million people, we use almost 4,000 megawatts. We have, I should say we don't use, but we have 4,000 megawatts of generating capacity per million people. It doesn't mean we always generate that much electricity, because in the case of the hydroelectrics, the rivers aren't always full of water, right? So we can't run those powerhouses at full capacity all the time. But in general, we have the potential to generate 4,000 megawatts of electricity per million people. And a 4,000 megawatt is the largest hydroelectric facility that we have in the United States. I believe Grand Coulee on the Columbia River. It's a huge, massive dam with, you know, one of the biggest rivers in the United States pouring through it. That's 4,000 megawatts per million people. So we obviously have a ton of other generating capacity beyond our hydroelectricity. I believe our hydroelectricity accounts for less than 20% of our total portfolio. We have tons of coal, diesel, and in Ecuador, on the other hand, they have about 10 times less generating capacity than we do per million people. You know, now in some ways it makes sense because they don't have to heat their houses in the wintertime. You know, arguably their energy consumption is inevitably going to be a bit lower, but at the same time, that also leads to especially when they have droughts and they can't run the existing hydroelectric facilities that they have, or these hydroelectric facilities just weren't correctly built, aren't functioning properly. There's rolling blackouts left and right. And I think that's probably what you were alluding to in, you know, Costa Rica or Honduras, where the same exact situation is playing out. So yeah, it's extremely tempting for them to just sign on the dotted line to dam as many rivers as they can in order to not have rolling blackouts, because, you know, obviously the economic potential that we have here in the United States is very much based upon how much energy we can produce, especially in the tech sector, right?
And these people are so desperate and lied to by the companies, so they think they're signing for something that's going to benefit them, and then they get screwed over anyways.
Gosh, you know, and in the case of the Rio Pasuno, they were told they were going to get water. They were told they were going to get power. They were told they were going to get royalties from the power generation. They were promised the world. And essentially what we've heard is that only the strategic few landowners that needed to be paid off were paid off. And everybody else who weren't absolutely necessary to be paid off were given nothing at all. You know, no benefits for schools that were promised, and then on top of that, you know, there's accusations that their land was actually stolen from them, taken from them unscrupulously, and you know, and that's just taken away from their ability to pay for their kids to go to school, to make a livelihood themselves. So from my experience, that anecdote on the Rio Pasuno is really the norm as opposed to any sort of outliers. It's these, you know, poor people that are promised the world and then lied to and taken advantage of.
Yeah, and they're really unknown. So if they really cause an issue, they can just have them killed. Like that one guy who had a big voice ended up being assassinated.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely been assassinations in Ecuador, across the Amazon, especially in Colombia, in Ecuador these days. It's extremely dangerous to be a social advocate, an environmental advocate in those places. It's, what do they say? You could pay a hitman $60 to take someone out. It's a kind of a frightening situation.
Mhm.
And so in that way, it's, when you see someone like Diego and the other paddlers in Ecuador standing up for their rivers, it's a really brave thing to do.
Yeah, for sure. That takes so much courage. Yeah, I was talking to my buddy that's down there, and he was saying they were using using the dams a lot as an excuse to put in access roads for mining for minerals like gold, which go into like semiconductors, computer components, and just people investing in gold overall.
Yeah, the gold situation is crazy because, I mean, it's not crazy. It's the epitome of wealth and status in our society and really around the world. So in that way, I've heard that 75% of the demand, the vast majority of the demand, is driven by jewelry, um, driven by monetary instruments, but a much smaller portion is actually used for electronics. But it is said that every single one of our smartphones has a little bit of gold in it these days. So the demand is just huge. And then when we start talking about the other rare earth metals, the lithium, and the things that we're going to have to come up with huge quantities in order to, let's say, all be driving an electric vehicle with a big battery. It kind of takes one environmental catastrophe and creates a whole new one with these open pit mines. Maybe we get to shut down some oil fields, but let's be honest. The third world, the developing world, these countries aren't going to be able to shift to electric vehicles anytime soon. And in a place like Ecuador that has pretty significant petroleum resources, they're going to continue to utilize that and continue to, and the companies, they're going to drain every last drop. So I don't know. It's hard not to get, I don't know. It's hard to keep your optimism,
Yeah.
but that's the beauty of, I guess, and that's the other part of whitewater kayaking that I think so many of us really enjoy and almost need in our lives, which is just this total release. Whether we're worrying about like these huge global topics of global warming or just environmental degradation or dams, or if we're just have like stress going on in our personal lives. Like, if you're anything like me, when I hit the river, it's just like, it just requires me to just shift all my focus to what I'm doing, and it's this ultimate relief of stress and burden that
Yeah.
I think we all carry around with us.
I've always said it's like a fun version of meditation. You're basically forced to be in the moment, because if you're not focusing on being in the moment, especially on higher class stuff, then you're going to get yourself into trouble. And it helps you escape from the shit that's going on around us.
Yeah, we were like talking about waterfalls earlier, and I was thinking about this earlier today. I don't think that I've ever really felt more connected than that moment right before the drop. You know what I'm talking about? You just feel
Sure.
like it's a beautiful moment.
Yeah, it's a clean moment. It's, if everything is going well, you kind of, you lose all the stress, you lose all the anticipation, you kind of, you get that singular moment of purity when there's just you can't possibly hope of changing anything at that moment. You're right there. Yeah, it is a crazy sensation.
My last waterfall was the sensation of my shoulder feeling like I torn it out. And that was on something really simple, but my first time in the Nirvana.
Well, I mean, I swear that running waterfalls is about as close to God as you can get on this earth. Like you're just once you're there, you're just there. That's the beautiful thing. I think a lot of times in life, you just kind of find yourself trying to turn around when things are scary in front of you, and that's the one place where you're like, nope, I can't turn around now. I'm
There's no hope to turn around. Yeah, and and you don't know how it's going to go, and it doesn't have to be the biggest waterfall. There's always a huge unknown of what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess that's probably why it's so impressive to see Dane go so massive over and over again, and just seem to be able to take all the unknown, take all the risk out of it somehow. Just completely be a master of his angle. I mean, but yeah, for the rest of us mortals, it's a pretty
Just on a whole nother level, just casually soloing class 5 along a road in California.
yeah. He's I've definitely boated with people that seem not to have the same level of fear or anxiety or concern that I do, and I haven't necessarily enjoyed that experience. I feel like I've definitely boated with some folks that I've felt like are kind of out of control, and they're just willing to take bigger risks than I am. Um, and that makes me feel even more out of control, I guess. But Dane's not one of those people, which is a credit to him, and I guess just to his ability as well. It's just like he's completely on top of it. He's got your back. Super chill to go out and hang out with, boat with. So it's I don't know. He's definitely a solid person to have at the top of our sport. Someone that personally I believe in, and I think he represents that kind of just magnanimous, approachable, just like good community character mentality that I feel sort of pervades our sport in general. Show up to the river, and chances are you're going to meet a pretty good person, pretty solid person out there.
Yeah, what I really like about him, you, and other people who are really pushing the limits of the sport is even though you guys have accomplished all these great things, still very humble and down to earth. A lot of people, they reach this like level of success and these accomplishments and they forget where they came from. But in this sport, most people are very humble and remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
getting into that, like, I mean, there's not a whole lot that you haven't done. So when we're talking about going back to where we came from, what would be one bit of advice that you would give new boaters? Because I find that the sport is full of new boaters now. Like it used to not be, but now I find that there's more new boaters than there are, experienced boaters.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Um, I'm glad to see the sport growing. I think if you'll allow me to take a little little side note here,
Go for it.
I think just having as many people in their local rivers as possible is a good thing. I know for me personally, I feel like it's given me a much stronger sense of connection to the natural world around me. Something that I didn't necessarily know about growing up. Um, even going up and going skiing, it's a totally different thing going to a ski area, and paying to get on a lift as opposed to showing up at a put-in that's in, I especially here in the United States is free for all comers. All you got to do is get to that put-in. You can get in the river. There's a sense of freedom there. There's a sense of connection, um, and I just can't help but feel like, for example, here in Missoula, we've got a whitewater play park in the river that flows through town, and having people constantly in the river, and knowing what the water quality is like just on a visual level, and understanding if the river has suds in it or if there might be a problem just could only be a good thing. And maybe even having a good solid group of people to stand up against, let's say, if there's another paper mill that wants to spring up and has the potential to pollute the river, or if
Or if someone wants to dewater the river for whatever reason, more irrigation or hydroelectricity, like there's just all of a sudden you have this built-in community that have this vested interest in the health and quality of the river. And now that I've taken the side trip, I've completely lost your question. So
What advice would you give to new boaters with all the experience that you have?
Yeah.
You know, you've got somebody that's walking into the sport. What would be your advice to them?
yeah, I think it could be a little overwhelming these days with the amount of the sport that we're exposed to on social media, in terms of, for a young paddler, what may be expected of him in terms of progressing into class 5 quickly or progressing into big waterfalls quickly. But I would really recommend for folks to take all of those posts and perspectives from other people with very much a grain of salt, and just gauge where you're at with the sport and where your happy place is in the sport, just based on your own experiences, and try not to focus too much on what other people are doing. It's awesome. It's great to have knowledge of what's been done before, what's possible, but at the same time, I think it can be a little stressful to think that, maybe you're not paddling well enough, or maybe you're not paddling hard enough, or maybe you're not pushing your own ability level enough. I think all of that stuff is just, it's so individual for each one of us, what rivers we want to run, whether we want to run rivers that have been run before, or rivers that, are relatively unexplored. I mean, there's just so many different aspects of the sport that any one of us can go after, from like the community side of things, the gatherings that are so much fun, to the multi-day trips, family style, or multi-day trips exploration, or, freestyle paddling is something that I think inevitably all of us do these days, to try to make sure that we don't just swim out of every single hole we drop into. Like, there's just so many different avenues in the sport, and probably avenues that we haven't even thought about yet. I think that embracing like the freedom of the sport, and the fact that it doesn't have to be anything like what it is for anybody else.
Yeah, the sport is your own journey, and you should treat it as such. Never feel pressured to do stuff that you don't want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think for me personally, it's just been following a dream and an inspiration, and where my heart is, more than feeling like, I need to go and boat something harder than the next person, or push myself, or whatever that is just following that happy place. And I think that what a lot of us find is that we just find this combination of like aesthetics and adrenaline and camaraderie. Just at some point, it forms this perfect synergy that sort of inspires us to take a trip to Mexico, or to drive to the other side of the country, or to be available to boat our local river at a certain flow. It's very much, I've heard it said now a few different times, where it's like it's not a sport, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think somehow, like, I'd even like to take it further. It's like, it's not a sport, it's a religion, or, but again, it's whatever you want it to be. It could be your hobby. It could be something that you do when the dirt isn't good and when there's no snow in the mountains. Or it could be something that, for a lot of us, and especially in places that don't have snow, or maybe you don't have access to a mountain bike, this plastic kayak in your garage is like everything you want to do in life. It defines the biggest goals you have. Or it could just be something that, you just have a goal to someday kayak the Grand Canyon, or it's just could be so many different things.
What's been the most difficult expedition for you, the river?
Gosh, in so many cases, it's like the more difficult, the better it's been. Like the Greenland crossing to a river that we ended up calling Twin Galaxies, where we crossed Greenland with kite skis, and that, I think, logistically and just in terms of my own knowledge and expertise, that was the most challenging for me because I was out of my element. We spent so much of that trip on kite skiing, winter camping, dealing with glacier crossing crevasses, like doing things that I just don't at all call myself an expert in. In fact, kind of a beginner in a lot of ways in that Arctic setup. But I mean, at the same time, I look back on that trip as being like one of the most fascinating and one of the most inspiring ones, personally inspiring, personally motivating that I've done. And so I kind of think, when I think about like the most challenging trips, I think about the ones where the group dynamics got really challenging for whatever reason, challenging river, stressful situation. Maybe there was a film project involved, which always can kind of muddy the waters in terms of people's goals and people's reasons for being there. If there's a film project there, and but yeah, so there was probably, and it was, I would probably call the most challenging river trip that I did the flattest river trip that I did as well. We went and did the Rio Apaporis in Colombia back in 2016. We were trying to do 700 miles on a river that drops like 700 feet in 700 miles. So like 6 times flatter than, or like, what is it, 12 times flatter than the Colorado through the Grand Canyon, like flat, like to the point where it was a struggle to paddle that river. Many times there's a lot of water and the river's just moving back upstream, and it's really hot, extremely hot, and we're trying to spend 8 or 9 hours a day in our kayak moving downstream, but it's beautiful at the same time. But we ended up running into a group of militant FARC that apparently hadn't decided to go along with the ceasefire, which was the reason that we were in this particular river. And we ended up spending a few days with them at the end of 22 days of some pretty marginal group dynamics. So, I guess that kind of reminds me of a question that you guys had earlier about like, what's the most challenging part of exploratory kayaking or expedition kayaking? And I think that, being sure and organizing and making sure that that group is all together and all on the same page, and that you have the best group going into the mission, and that you maintain that small group communication, and you maintain this level of understanding and cooperation in the group throughout. That's certainly one of the most important parts of exploratory kayaking, expedition kayaking. And it can be one of the more challenging aspects when things start to, when people just inevitably get on different pages, right? And for anybody who spent any amount of time in the sport, you've had a situation where you've been on the river and all of a sudden, things aren't working out. So it's just a matter, and that's, it's, gosh, the same passion and the adrenaline and the aesthetics and all of those streams that are causing it to be such an amazing, positive, inspiring, and even emotional experience, I think can also cause an equal amount of distress between two paddlers that may not be on the same page, or a group of paddlers. And so I've gone back and forth over the years about like, what's the best way to mitigate that, essentially, is like, how do we organize the trip beforehand to keep that from happening? And it's talked a lot about for people that go on big multi-day trips, especially the Grand Canyon. Anybody you talk to on the Grand Canyon, the chances are they might have had an experience where sometime over the course of 2 to 3 weeks, things went pear-shaped with someone in the group. And in terms of the expedition kayaking side of things, I've just found that keeping the group as small as possible is quite helpful in that regard.
What's that ideal number look like?
So I've definitely found that 5 is a challenge, because it seems like there's always some imbalance in, do we stay, do we go, do we camp here, do we camp there? It can always be 2 to 3, 3 to 2. There's always an imbalance there. Whereas with 4 people, it just seems like it's just so much more even. If you're having a problem with one person, there's always someone else to be on your side, and it's just, it's not a group of 3 versus a group of 2. So and it's not to say that I won't boat with a group of 5 or larger, but in general, I've found that my preferred number is 3 and 4. I've definitely had some amazing trips with just another person being on the same page, but I always find myself sort of lamenting or thinking that we weren't able to kayak the river as well and as safely as we could have if we would have had 1 or 2 more people out there for safety, essentially. So, but I mean, at times, just having one other person with you that's on the same page, but that can be the only way to get things done. I've had some great trips in that way, but yeah,
Yep.
I'd say my preferred number is probably 3 or 4.
Yeah, a lot of people you can probably get along with for a day, but being on a river with someone for multiple days can definitely change that whole dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and you just don't know, right? It's hard to know someone until see what happens to them in a really stressful situation, and it's even for ourselves, it's hard to know how every single situation is going to treat us, how we're going to react, and what's going to happen. And I mean, it has to do so much with, especially if we're traveling in another country, are we feeling under the weather? Like, there's just so many different variables that can go into affecting and causing a schism in the group. It doesn't have to just be, one challenging personality. In fact, it's oftentimes just such a snowball effect I've found of so many different things that have sort of all decided to go wrong at the same time. And I think that also is a lesson that I've found for just accidents in general on the river. Is it's never just something that comes completely out of thin air. It's always one thing leads to another, to another, to another. So, I mean, and at the end of the day, there's no possible way to mitigate all of these risks. Like there's something that's going to happen to us. I like to think that if you're still kayaking, you're in between swims, right? It means if you're still on the river, something's going to go wrong. It's just part of the game. And but thinking about that and being cognizant of the fact that the later in the day that it gets, once one swim happens, once one incident that happens, you're much more susceptible to having something else happen. And just having the ability to sort of stop the madness, having the equipment, having the reserves, a little bit of extra food, maybe even having some sleeping gear, some overnight gear on a river that you weren't necessarily planning to overnight, but you thought that might be a possibility, having an emergency blanket, just being able to stop and not feel like you have to rush downstream and not getting into a hurry has been a lesson that I learned pretty early on, and I feel like it's definitely helped me mitigate some potentially worse scenarios, and just being able to call it off for the day.
I think the River Runner really showcased how certain experiences and events in that movie can affect someone. Like Scott Lindgren lost like 6 friends in a year that were really close, and he started getting angry at all the paddlers around him because of it, and all those traumatic events started projecting, on everyone else. So stuff like that happens outside of the paddle itself can affect you in so many ways.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, just that snowball effect of, gosh, like if we think about the times when we got mad at a friend, or like you have some bad situation that just it doesn't feel like it's who you are, who you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because you're trying to be that way. It's because of the the bad incident. Someone cut you off on the roadway, or you're feeling under the weather, you have a chest cold, like all of these things play into it. So yeah, I also enjoyed that movie quite a bit in that way, where it really takes a deep dive into, gosh, because at the top of the sport too, it's like we are these alpha personalities. It's not, I think at this point you can't say alpha male anymore, because we have females at the top of our sport too that
Noria is just holy crap.
Yeah, she's amazing paddler, and and a leader in so many of these expeditions. And so being a leader, being out in front, I want to be in a group where everybody can be that leader, right? Everybody has the ability to be out front, but oftentimes it's just not the case. And so that leader has to be someone who is who's ready to slow down the pace, and make sure that the person in the back of the group is just as connected to the plan and to the river and to what's coming up as the person in front, who may have the most knowledge. And that's such a difficult thing to do, because the person in front probably likely has the most experience on that particular river, or just in general. So they're the one who feels the most comfortable, and who has the best mental map of what's about to happen. Whereas the person in the back, the exact opposite can be true. So for that person in the front to make sure that the pace that's set is essentially for a pace that's set for the slowest person in the group, and how setting that slower pace is going to make you go that much faster, because you're not going to have a swim, you're not going to have to stop and empty out the boat, you're not going to have to stop and warm the person up on the side of the river. I mean, it sounds like a really simple philosophy, but it's so difficult to actually do when you're the person out in front, and you're just like, oh my god, all I want to do is just not catch a single eddy and rally off this waterfall. But it's not always the right call.
Do you find that your crews consist more of where each person has like specialty, like let's say you're stronger in rigging, one person's stronger in this area, or does everyone have pretty much expert knowledge in all the things needed?
Yeah. Sometimes it's very much that way. Like for Boomer and I in Greenland, crossing Greenland, we were very much relying on Sarah's just immense kite skiing knowledge of the Greenland ice cap, how to deal with the crevasses, and we might have had more. We probably had more experience on the river itself, dealing with the class 5, potentially portaging through the canyons, that sort of thing. So I think inevitably everybody has a pretty varied skill set out there. But inevitably, even the person who's not the fastest on the river, not the best paddler, they might be the person who has they might be your registered nurse on the trip, which is
Definitely
inevitably
a good person to have.
inevitably a hell of a lot more important than the person who's just out on the sharp end, leading you Blue Angel into all these big class 5 rapids is the person that's gonna, clean up the mess when someone bonks their head or bonks their elbow.
So besides the 5 pieces of gear, what's must-have piece of gear that you need to have on the river?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the throw bag. The play park right here in Missoula is Brennan's Wave. We call it Brennan's Wave for Brennan Guth. He drowned in the early 2000s in Chile, and the story is that he drowned because the paddler that he was with one other paddler, and that paddler didn't have a throw bag. And would he have had that throw bag, he could have pulled Brennan out of the cave and got him out of the river. So yeah, in general, the throw bag's the easiest one to forget. If we forget our helmet, usually we just don't put on the river. If you forget your skirt, of course, that's going to keep you from getting on the river. All of these things is just like you have your gear on, but then it's so easy to just be like, oh shit, my throw bag. And that's it's such a life-saving tool. So that would be my number one pick.
Yeah, we were talking last time about that, not only having it, but actually knowing how to use it. Because you could end up actually roping that around someone's leg or something and making it even more dangerous. Someone, I forget what group it was, somewhere on Facebook, someone posted how they actually did that and ended up killing someone because they used it wrong. And then now you have to live with that for the rest of your life.
Oh man. I mean,
I can't imagine that.
No. And yeah, I mean, that's a whole other topic is accidents, and that they're inevitable on the river, and that we all need to be cognizant of, not only being as safety conscious as we can on the river, but also being as aware of, the post-traumatic, the stress that we endure when something does go wrong, and not just trying to play it off, and sort of just being very aware of everyone's mental health after after an incident, because for better or for worse, when you're in this sport long enough, you're going to know someone who passes away on the river, and it's always a tragedy. And it's no matter what happens, whether it's someone went out and tried to run a 300-foot waterfall, or someone was essentially just boating through class 2 and got caught by an alder on the bank of the river, something that just could happen to anyone at any time. We just need to be so cognizant of how traumatic and how stressful, and how those tragedies need to be treated with respect and care, and just given time to heal. We do this for fun, we do it for passion, we do it for recreation, but that doesn't mean that we can't have an experience that's just as traumatic as what a soldier might have out on the battlefield. It's a crazy sport that way.
I think it's really important for people to be more open and share that, even though it's extremely hard to want to share that stuff, because a lot of people are taught, just especially as men, we're taught, hey, hold in your emotions, don't express it, don't say anything, and act tough.
Yeah.
And I think they covered that in the River Runner a little bit, of how Scott would always just hold everything out in, and then eventually, inevitably, it just explodes and you project it on everyone else. So it's good to have like that core group of people that you can go to and share those stories with.
Yeah. And I guess that was, what I was thinking about trying to express with that alpha sort of mentality is that, yes, pushing the issue and being able to motivate and inspire, and like Scott was able to lead the trip into the Sangpo and so many other rivers. Like, we respect him for that. But then the other side is, are we being too hard? Are we not respecting the other members of our group enough? Are we not caring enough about their emotions and their fears? And so,
and that can really get to them as well and make them paddle worse, because now they're stressed out.
Yeah. I mean, and isn't it so amazing how much of a difference it makes for us individually on the river and how we paddle, whether we're gripped or whether we're loose and relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just getting upside down, and if you think to yourself, oh my God, I'm going to drown, I'm going to die, like how difficult it is just to accomplish something as, you know, as simple as an Eskimo roll, as opposed to just getting upside down and being loose and relaxed and being able to, you know, utilize your hips. Like, yeah, I mean, that plays out on a much larger scale when you're talking about someone in your group who just, maybe they just don't know when the portage is coming, you know, and they just need to be told over and over again, hey, don't worry, you know, we're going to go here, 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 here. They need to know that around the next corner, they're not going to, you know, fly off the 50-footer into the rocks. Like, and for someone who's done that run dozens and dozens and dozens of times, it's like, oh my God, why is this person being, you know, being so cowardly about this? It's just that actually they just don't know, they don't know where the danger is. And if we would just take a little bit more time to explain to them what's coming up, or that the danger isn't what they think it is, or that there is danger there and we're going to go here, here, and here. And then all of a sudden you realize, holy shit, I lost track of where I was. Thank God I stopped to really think and talk this out as much as, you know, even when we're like giving directions on the river, we can say, you got to go river left, river left, river left. And if you're not pointing, all of a sudden you're like, holy shit, I was, you know, facing the wrong direction and it was actually river right. But if you're like pointing and you're taking the time to really look into each other's eyes and try to really understand what you're saying, as opposed to just like, oh, let's get this over with, let's get it done, and hurrying. Yeah, this accidents can be avoided in that way.
Yeah, I like to say to people, this sport, to me, I believe it's 90% mental and like 10% physical.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a huge mental component to it. It just seems like these movements that we do are so, I don't know, they just seem like they should be so much easier, but accomplishing them when the water may be working against you and when, you know, there's a million other things racing through your mind just gets so incredibly difficult at times.
So what's your go-to boat?
At this point, I've been a Jackson guy now since 2006. So I finally met EJ, and we were hanging out with them at the Reno Whitewater Park, and it was the first time that I had met someone in the manufacturing industry, in the boat design industry, that was like talking to me about running class 5 and wanted to go on a trip and, you know, run a river. And it was pretty shortly after that I went with EJ and Nick. I don't think Dane was on that very first one. That was back in like 2007. But we all went, and it was like a big Jackson team reunion down in Mexico. So that definitely was like, holy shit, you know, like I've actually never even boated with hard class 5 with someone who has kids before. So he was the first person that I'd ever seen as a father running this type of class 5 on the Alsa Secas. So it just was just probably a lot of respect for him. And then from the beginning, I just believed in the designs, the simplicity, having a boat that I felt like I could easily fix out in the field, whether it's like the rope system, the back bands, or the bulkhead. It's all pretty simple. And then, it's just been a lot of years, I guess, coming up on over 15 years, coming up on 20 years. Yeah, a couple more years will be 2 decades with them. But it's just a real simple design. I mean, there's obviously, I'm not someone who needs to say, oh, Jackson's always been the best kayak. They've always had the best designs. Like, that's the beautiful thing about our industry is like, there's Walk Out there, there's Liquid Logic, there's Dagger, like there's the European companies, the Zet, you know, like there's there's a good amount of competition now that's obviously really driving boat designs in a positive direction. Piranha, and I think that it's my affinity for Jackson. I also have an incredible amount of respect and appreciation for the competition in our sport, and the fact that there are these amazing boat manufacturers, I guess kind of around the world at this point. There's even a new boat manufacturer down in Argentina right now,
Huh.
Aquaviva, and they're selling boats for like $600,
Wow.
which is amazing because the economy in Argentina is just in complete disarray. And, the folks down there, quite simply, many of the paddlers just can't afford boats. So that cheaper option for them is awesome. And so I would love to see that happen more and more. If there was a boat manufacturer in Ecuador, I mean, you think about a place like that, is the only way an Ecuadorian can get a kayak is when it comes on a plane with a paddler from Europe or the United States, right?
Yeah.
So there's just this limited amount of gear. And so inevitably when it shows up there, it's going to be more expensive and just limited in general, which doesn't do the kayaking community in these other places that don't have the same access to used gear that we do. It doesn't do them any favors, because it puts this innate competition into the kayaking community that it just really doesn't exist in the US, in terms of like, just think how right now, if you really wanted a creek boat, you didn't mind if it had a crack in it, you could probably go out and find yourself a creek boat for what, $300-$400, if not cheaper.
Yeah.
And forget about it in Ecuador. That's not even an option. So yeah, the more access to kayaks that we can have and create around the world, with the principle of getting as many people in the river as possible to help protect these rivers. Yeah, I'm a big believer.
It'd be awesome to see some more affordable options, because that's definitely a big barrier of entry for a lot of people, is getting a nice high quality new boat. Is they're like, I think Prawn is the most expensive right now, like $1,700.
Yeah,
I d-
yeah, they're
I d-
not cheap.
Oh yeah, I just paid like 2 grand for my soul, so we'll
Not
see how that goes.
not cheap, not cheap. When I got into the sport, again, there's a big used kayak market. Certainly depends on what time of year you're boating and what geographic location. I mean, I didn't have a dry suit personally until, gosh, 2005 or two. I did the first 7 years of my kayaking career in thermal underwear and a dry top, and I'm glad I survived.
Damn.
It's like, I mean, we all know there are definitely scenarios out there. You get yourself in trouble. Like, if you don't have that dry suit on, you're fucked.
Especially out west. Isn't that like dry suit all year pretty much?
No, not necessarily. You could
Okay.
we definitely have dry top time of year, but if you're trying to boat during like the good high water months, which is, usually like end of April into May, into beginning of June, like the whole spring, yeah, it's cold. It can be cold, but it's just depends. I mean, you're if you have a dry suit on, if you have all the right equipment, it just affects your ability and what you're going to be able to run comfortably. I mean, that's the bottom line. But it's also one of those things where, let's say your buddy gets pinned, right? And he has a dry suit on, so he's good. Well, better than if he didn't have the dry suit on, but you don't have a dry suit on. And so your ability to get out in the river and spend the necessary time in the river in order to help him get out of the kayak, help him get out of the water, basically save his life, is going to be limited. So it's, but at the same time, yeah, like I said, I spent the first 7 years of my kayaking career in thermals and a dry top. And I guess we just made do. Some of us, one of my buddies, he'd always put on this old Farmer John wetsuit. Like, I mean, that shit worked. It does. It's not like we all know how uncomfortable it is to put those things on, but shit, they work.
We were just actually talking about that before you got on. I've messed up my dry suit, so all I have currently is a really nice Farmer John and a dry top. And I was like, well, I guess it's when I'm to rock with this winter. So I'm going to be that guy this winter.
Oh, well, got to do what you got to do. I mean, gosh, we'd all love to be sponsored, kayakers that get all of our shit for free. But at the same time, like, we can, you make do out there. And dry suits are not cheap these days. That's for sure.
We'll get there, Sam, where Kokatat reaches out to us.
They're going to have to do some work because I'm 6'4" and 260. So
you
get them custom made. They're so expensive too.
Yeah.
Expensive. Yeah. Expensive. There's, I guess the cheaper one would be is if you don't do the Gore-Tex. You know what? God, I should have bought it. I was in the used gear store last spring, and there was a used Kokatat, the 2-piece with the 2-piece Kokatat, and it was an Idol, and they had it for like $300 or $400.
Wow,
it's crazy. So
that's the one I have, and Kokatat backs their products. I used mine for 6 years, sent it in for repair, and they're like, "Oh well, it's not repairable. We'll send you a new one for free." I'm like,
hot
holy
damn
shit!
Yeah. I have the Devil's Club R top, and then I've got a pair of NRS bottoms there, and they lock in pretty well together. But the problem is like obviously it's NRS, so it's like I trust it as far as I can throw it, kind of thing. We'll see. It's gonna be a cold winter.
Wish you the best.
Appreciate it.
I'd probably have a used one for you, but I don't think 6'4", 260. I'm only 5'10" myself, so might not fit you very well.
Yeah, that's kind of the used market is kind of slim for me.
You'll be good. You'll be good in the wetsuit though, and it offers impact protection. That's the nice thing about the wetsuit.
Yeah, I would agree. Also, we were talking like we were on
swim protection.
We were on the Nantahala back in I guess January, just kind of messing around, and I ended up kind of getting pinned up and swam. But even in that, plus the dry top, it really wasn't that bad. I had the fleece underneath it, so it wasn't bad.
Yeah, the coldest I've been out was 9 degrees on the Potomac, and we were with a guy on a sup, and he only had like that kind of material, and he couldn't even stand on his sup, so he's basically just swimming the whole rapid the whole time. So if people like that can do it, should be no problem.
Oh shit! 9 degrees Fahrenheit?
Yeah, never again.
It's an art form to boat when it's that cold. We pretty much found you have one chance to get your spray skirt on, and then
you have to get in the water to defrost the gear. And then at the bottom of this rapid, Little Falls, it was just an ice shelf. So it's like, you better not swim or you're going under.
Holy shit. That's a nightmare.
Yeah, you'll be nice and ready to go up and boat anywhere with that kind of experience.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend, would definitely not recommend in that cold kind of temps.
Yeah.
What's your med kit look like?
So I've got my med kit in one of those reusable Ziplocs.
Okay.
Those are super nice. And it's like, what would it be? Quart size? Or no, I guess it's like a half gallon size reusable. I've got a lot of bandaging. From time to time, I've got sutures in there. I don't always keep sutures, but I definitely have stereo strips. I have kind of stopped putting any sort of like painkillers in my my first aid kit, and just have gone with a combination of ibuprofen and acetaminophen, which is a pretty damn good combination. And if you really have like a savage trauma out on the river, it just seems to me that having an opioid or yeah, one of those harder painkillers isn't going to do you any good. And it's just easier to get your hands on the over the counter shit.
Yeah, you don't know people's past, so you don't want to accidentally get addicted to opioids.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's obviously a real concern. Just having that stuff around is has its own dangers. So, I always like to have some antifungal cream with me. That seems to be something that crops up from time to time, whether it's jock itch or athlete's foot, or in the worst case scenario, that foot rot. Having a bit of antifungal cream, but I've also found that that using and just like maintaining like a tea tree oil can go a long ways towards any sort of like, with that wetsuit. If you have any wetsuit rash going on, get on the tea tree oil. That can help out quite a bit. Yeah, just wound care. And then, aside from that, in terms of like splinting stuff, we usually have so much padding and whatnot in our kayaks, some combination of the breakdown paddle with a seat pad. You really don't need to put too much splinting stuff in your actual first aid kit, because it seems like, whether it's utilizing a polypro for a tourniquet, or like I said, part of a breakdown paddle for a splint. We have a lot of stuff in our kayak itself that can be used in a first aid sort of scenario. That said, also, like, duct tape or gorilla tape is a paddler's best friend for boat repair, and then also is great for first aid. I tend to, even in warm paddling trips, always have a pair of neoprene mitts with me. I've found that like hand injuries, and especially knuckle injuries, when we flip upside down and hit rocks inevitably with our hands, like that's one of the more common injuries that we have on the river. And just being able to bandage that up and then throw the neoprene mitt on top of it, even when it's warm out, works pretty damn good. And it just doubles as a little bit more padding in your camera bag, which seems like a lot of paddlers these days just go ahead and carry a lap bag with them, a watershed, to have, just to have one. Because I don't necessarily have every single one of my dry bags that I use isn't necessarily a watershed, right? Because a watershed is good for your camera, your passport. Your sleeping bag is nice to have in a watershed, but your food, let's say like your first aid kit that's already inside a waterproof, resealable Ziploc sort of deal, that doesn't necessarily we don't need to spend so much money or have the burliest watershed dry bag in order to just put our, keep a breakdown paddle, or keep, your pack of dehydrated food, or, these snacks that are already protected. So that's one thing that I do to try to sort of economize my paddle kit is by I have my watershed for my camera bag, and for my wallet, my passport, and anything that I want to make sure that's 100% dry. And I also have one more food afloat for my sleeping bag and my layer of dry clothes. And then after that, I'll just use roll top dry bags and save weight and save cost.
Speaking of weight, how much do you think, with all your gear, that your boat weighs?
Depends if I'm carrying a climbing rope,
Okay.
and how much. If I've had drills on some of these kayaking trips where we're using the drill to make anchor bolts.
Oh wow.
So if I don't have a drill, if I don't have a rope, if I don't have a 60-meter rope, on some of the trips I've had a 100-meter rope. Like, it just depends. But I want my kayak as light as possible. But we know that, the base weight for most of our creek boats is 45 to 50 pounds. So you figure you're probably going to have, at a bare minimum, 20 pounds of gear.
That definitely makes a difference in performance.
It can, but it can also help, right? It can make your boat a little sluggish, but for a lot of these creek boats, like, I've found that they perform a little bit better with weight in them.
Huh.
Because they're so voluminous. When you have 90 to 100 gallons of volume, like, you personally don't need all that volume. Like, and being on the surface of the river isn't always the best place to be. Like, sometimes you want to be sunk down. Sometimes you want to be hitting those holes and sinking down a little bit and catching the current out. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I've oftentimes found that I prefer to have at least 10, 15 pounds of my kayak between, even on a day trip. You've got your throw bag, you've got your pin kit, you got your breakdown paddle, and probably a dry layer, maybe some food. I like having all that weight, and it very much affects the way a kayak performs in terms of, how much weight do you have in the back, how much are you able to put up front in front of the bulkhead, and if your boat feels off, maybe you're just way too stern heavy, and you need to try to get something either between your legs or up in front of the bulkhead.
There's a lot of things you just don't think about, like balancing out the boat.
Yeah, and even, like, not necessarily just in the river, but for me, it's even more important when I'm portaging, making sure that I'm not stern heavy, and that that I'm not constantly trying to pick the boat up, and that it's balanced properly on my shoulder. And the way I like to have it is to have the stern just slightly heavier, so that just the weight of my arm is enough to sort of keep the boat balanced on my shoulder. And it's incredible how much that can reduce the amount of effort that it requires to portage or to hike in.
Alrighty. Sam's got to dip out for work in a bit, so I have a few more questions if you got more time, Ben.
Yeah, I could do a couple more questions.
Alrighty,
Hey,
sweet.
Ben, it was great meeting you, man.
Likewise, Sam, man. Good luck with the podcast, and hope you get into some good boating this winter.
Yeah, man, you be safe out there.
Right on.
Hey, brother.
See you, Sam. Alrighty, let me maximize my thing. It's my first time really using Google Meet for anything.
Yeah, it's actually quite a bit. It's the first time I've used it as well, and it's way easier than Zoom or Teams in terms of, like, it's just all integrated into the email.
Yeah, then there's like a streaming option. So if I wanted to stream it live to YouTube, I could. And I guess because I pay for it, so the quality is a little better for recording as well.
Gotcha.
So if you had to start over today, what are some of the first steps you'd take?
Starting with really good sound instruction and, like, beginning with good habits, I think super important.
Yeah,
I was lucky to have some good teachers, but I feel like, God, I would have loved to have taken a class from Cali Collective, or been able to go to NOC, or, like, go study with the Jacksons at Rock Island in Tennessee. Like, those, especially in the early years, like, all these habits that you start with are going to be the ones that stick with you for the rest of your paddling career, better or for worse. It's just so much harder to make those changes when you're 2, 3, 4, 5, a decade into your paddling career, as opposed to just starting off with the right habits.
Yeah, it's so much easier to start a habit than it is to break it. And I definitely started off with bad habits. Coming from mostly paddling with a lot of clubs, people mean well and love to teach, but not everyone should be an instructor. And I think through instructing myself is how I learned to break a lot of bad habits. Because when you can actually break it down and teach it, then it means you really know how to do whatever that skill is.
Yeah, I feel like that was the biggest benefit, the biggest learning moment. The best thing that happened to my paddling was taking a course with an ACA instructor course with Mary DeReamer in California, and learning, not just learning how to do it, but learning how to teach that and being cognizant of, the intricacies and how some people learn visually and some people learn by repetition, and I think that for me personally, I inevitably I learn by doing it myself, but I also learn visually, and I also can benefit from hearing it described. And yeah, there's just so many different ways to learn some of these skills.
Yeah, it's super important to adapt to whatever the person you're teaching instead of just being stubborn and stuck with one way of doing it. So, this is more for me than anything. How do you fund these trips? Do you have a career in something else? Do you do it through kayaking, sponsorships?
Yeah, so for the first 12 years of my kayaking career, I was just doing seasonal work. I was doing bridge construction in the summertime in California, and that was a great way to fund it. Just keeping costs as low as possible and finding a good job in the off season or on season, whatever the case may be. And then from, what was it, 2010, 2012 until last January, I was a member of the Eddie Bauer team of athletes, and that allowed me to focus full time on whitewater kayaking and get some funding for the expeditions. Also got a lot of funding over the years from a TV show that we were doing in Brazil, exploring the rivers of Brazil and then exploring the rivers around the world. And so, yeah, I guess since about 2012, I've been whitewater kayaking full time
That's
with
awesome.
with the help of some industry sponsors, doing some film festival stuff, but the central theme of being able to pull it off is still just keeping my costs as low as I can. Um, and there's obvious ways to do that. And just we call it living like a dirtbag, essentially. Dirtbagging it.
I'm really bad at it. It's so hard to do because I see these like cool accessories. I'm like, ooh, a boot warmer that could also dry off my socks. And then I'm like, no, Nick, you don't need that.
Man, and until you get the companies to sponsor you, like the used gear market is incredible, absolutely incredible. And now that I'm not with Eddie Bauer anymore, like I'm back in the used gear store looking for, if I need a rain jacket or whatever, it's like I'm going and it got really good after COVID, especially.
Yeah, so many people getting into the sport and leaving and selling all their gear for cheap.
Yeah, I mean, the used gear market is, what I wish was available to the paddlers in Ecuador, especially, in countries where they don't have access to it. The bar to entry the sport is just so much higher, right? I mean, gosh, in the summertime here in the States, a beginner entry level boat, entry used boat, something that's got some duct tape on it, paddle, life jacket, helmet, like you're into the sport for like $300 or $400
Yeah.
easy. And that's a beautiful thing. Like,
Yeah, I got a Prion for like $200 and those things are practically indestructible.
yeah, I mean, gosh, it's
You talk
always a good time to get good at melting plastic, welding plastic. It's an art form.
Yeah, they showed us when I went to the Alsaceca with Adventure Rec. I was working for them for a month, and they showed us how to do it. And it's really not that hard to learn how to weld your own boat.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you could do it with a heat gun, or you could do it with a butane stove.
If you're motivated, you'll figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Best to start with a kayak that you're not too attached to. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And a heat gun, right? A heat gun obviously is, you're a little less likely to melt a hole in your kayak with a heat gun than you are with like a propane torch or something like that. Although the propane torch works a lot quicker.
Yeah, someone I worked for, Eli, he just got a plastic welder and started doing
Ooh,
repairs for people. Yeah, he's on the Jackson team. He's always looking for new business thing. He does like gasket repairs, and plastic welding.
nice.
Well, I think that answered a lot of the questions I had and was really helpful, and hopefully helps other people who are looking to get into it as well. And I think most important thing I got out of it is really working to give more people into the sport, because the more people that use the rivers, the more we're going to fight to preserve it. Because if we don't have rivers to paddle, we lose the sport entirely.
Yeah, I think it's a good community. I think keeping the focus on these venues, these rivers, the places that inspire us, is is a great place to be, a great place to have our focus, as opposed to how much that we can showcase our own talents in the sport. For me, I hope it's been more about just really being in awe of the rivers and these special places that we get to go, just because we're able to learn how to utilize the kayak. You can't get there with a jet ski, thank God.
Yeah.
Many cases you can't get there with a raft, for better for worse. You have to get into this little weird floating plastic kayak with no motor in it. And it'll take you some special places, of course. But yeah, it's continuing to have those places for the next generation and for our own future is has got to be one of the most important pieces to maintain, to have our sport continue to be so vibrant.
It's definitely super cool being able to see things from a perspective that like only 1% of the population will ever get to see. And especially for you doing like over 100 first descents, like that feeling of doing something no one else has ever done is probably like something only like 5 people in the world will ever get to feel.
Yeah, and not even that. It's just like finding your space on the river. And here in downtown Missoula, when there's people zipping all over the place, all you got to do is like paddle 10 feet out into the river, and all of a sudden you feel like you're in this wilderness. It's just a great relief. And even, and maybe especially for maintaining and utilizing these waterways, they're right in the middle of our city, and might not be as appreciated as they should be. I feel like if this river that we have here in Missoula were in downtown Denver, for example, there'd be hundreds, if not thousands, of paddlers out in this river. But because it's up here and it's been here for generations, and people don't even think about getting out there, you can go out there, especially when it's 20 degrees out, and be all alone in the middle of the city. They're these special wilderness places where we all can find our own personal space and our own place where we've been that nobody else has been before. Because when you really think about it, like, the water's here and then it's gone, and that same water will never be there again. That current will never be the same again. Yeah, it'll look similar, but gosh, there are days when we go out to a river that's maybe in our own backyard when the water's up, and that's a day, and you're in that particular spot, and that's an experience that only you will ever have. So I don't think it's a matter of, oh, I'm the first person to have ever gone down this river, or I'm like, in so many of these cases, yeah, maybe we're the first people to kayak down the river, but there were indigenous people living there for generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years before us, that surely had been down there before, but maybe we're the first in the kayak. And I don't know, it doesn't necessarily have to be you as the first person down that river. Like I said, you could literally be just on your afternoon off, scooting out into the river, and all of a sudden you find this perfect little current, and makes your day.
Yeah, I think that's a more humble and beautiful way of looking at it. because I just moved down to the wintering grounds in Columbus, Georgia, and just did the first run on the Chattahoochee yesterday, and just paddling this whitewater between two states in the middle of a city is just so cool.
Right on. I hope I make it down there someday. That wave looks badass.
Oh yeah, it does. But right now they haven't been really doing prime releases because I
Gotcha.
guess someone said this was their guess. They said last year they were releasing a bunch because they were prepping for the storms. So they're basically emptying all the reservoirs, and now they're kind of making up for all of that water they let out.
Saving up water for irrigation and for city use. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I hope you guys get a bunch of rain here. Unfortunately, we're about to get some rain. We don't necessarily want rain this time of year, but take whatever water we can get. Maybe the river will come up.
Yeah, exactly. And even at low flow, at least there's something to do here. Where I came from, Baltimore, there's not shit. Like you have Jones Falls, but that's like heavily polluted. They actually used to do releases on it and take better care of it. But then they started funding a dog park that's no longer really. It'd be so cool to see something like that brought back to health and all the recreation that could be made of it. It seems like turning Columbus into like a whitewater park has done so much for the locals. It brought a lot of joy and happiness from it. And it would be cool to see that in other cities as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at its best, it creates better ecology, additional economy, getting tourism out in the river. Here in Missoula, there's been so much that's happened since what was it, 2006 or 7, when they took out a dam just upstream of town. The water quality improved drastically. They pulled a bunch of rebar out of the river. All of a sudden, there's businesses springing up. There's raft tours down the river. There's tons of people showing up in the summer just to put their tube on the river. Like, it's just a win for everybody. And it's one of the most low cost pieces of recreation that you can do. Benefits, like public benefits, that you can do for a whole community is just improving the quality of the river and allowing people to get out there and swim, paddle, kayak, tube, whatever. It really exemplifies sort of that freedom of public, that sense of public lands right in the middle of an urban area is there for a river. So
I think it's great you bring up all those benefits because a lot of that's not something I really considered, like the economical benefits, ecology, and maybe a lot of other people don't think about that, especially the people just watching us. They're like, oh, they're just having fun in a kayak, but they don't think about all the other benefits it has.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're just trying to highlight all the attributes, but really at the end of the day, it's pretty obvious that if you've got enough water to paddle in and you have clean enough water to paddle in, then you're much better off than the alternative. That's for sure.
Yeah. I try to stay more optimistic because there's so much shit that goes on around the world that's negative. I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly important for all of us. Is on one hand, don't lose your optimism. Don't lose your passion. Don't lose your motivation. But on the other hand, is to keep your eyes open. Right? If you see something that's going wrong, don't close yourself off to looking, and paying attention to what's happening to more than just what's inside the river. Pay attention to the riverbanks. Say something. Oh. I mean, this is the one thing that I would, as as an older kayaker, as someone who's kind of been involved in this social media game now for a number of years, it's like I just wish that we would stop posting photos without saying something important, because there's like, it doesn't have to be a first descent. It doesn't have to be throwing some high feet kickflip. It doesn't have to be anything. Like, every single time we go out to the river, there's something to say. There's some story. There's 9 degrees on the Potomac, or just a beautiful sunny day with friends, and a sense of relief after a hard week, or just saying something that sort of qualifies the experience, as opposed to just
Just only the highlights, the
only the
biggest
highlights.
things.
Or yeah, there's
Like,
just so much. There's so much that's happening out there that we can share with others, that can be therapeutic, or
Mhm.
inspirational, or educational, or provide awareness. Whatever. There's just so much that's going on. It just feels like whenever the majority of the posts that I see from kayakers, where it's just fire, or it's just me having the best day ever. There's just so much more going on than just us in the river. There's someone else there with us. There's a community that's protected this river. There's a reason why we're there. There's just so much to tell. So I
Yeah.
just feel like there's so much opportunity
Yeah,
to
I think
share.
that's where both you and Rush do really good, is those storytelling videos that you guys make. Just really gets us thinking about more than just being on the river, about the effects it has on people.
Yeah, and I think that more than anything, there's an incredible amount of room for storytelling kayakers
Yeah, and
to
if you look at YouTube, the videos that are doing the best are the ones where it's people taking the time to make great edits, storytelling.
yeah. I mean, that's good to hear. I mean, there's also the cat videos that are incredibly popular, that
Yeah.
I have an affinity for towards myself.
Yeah, I worked in social media for like 2 years, so it's kind of depressing, because like the stuff that succeeds the most is usually the negative crap, or the stuff that's not providing that much value, like the cat videos, or people are shaking their asses on stage. It's like, why can't the stuff of someone going down to Ecuador and standing up against something, why can't that be the stuff that blows up?
Yeah.
It's just frustrating to see sometimes, because it's like a lot of people put so much work into creating these videos, and you can see that through it, and then they just don't blow up.
They don't blow up. Yeah. Well, each and every one of us has our own individual choice, what to watch, what to
Yep.
create. Yeah, it's a little depressing, thinking about what actually goes viral and whatnot. But at the same time, it's pretty liberating to think that we are literally masters of our own destiny.
Yeah.
And that we choose what we watch, we choose what we create, and there's an incredible amount of stories that haven't been told.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk to you after this about maybe hopping on a call like this, and we can just basically interview you about the causes you want to talk about, and then we can take that long form video, turn them into short form clips for reels on Instagram, whatever you want to post it, and hopefully get some attention that way.
Yeah, I'm definitely happy to work with you again. Hope this doesn't require too much editing, but yeah,
It really doesn't. I took some of EJ's newer videos and made an Instagram around that, and got like 500,000 views in a month. So hopefully we can do a similar thing. You.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
But it's
EJ's
also like
EJ's a juggernaut, though.
It's also EJ, and he'll say stuff that like people find controversial, and that's what gets views. He's like, you don't have a bomb-proof roll if you can't roll in every single wave. And I'm like looking at the Ben Stookesberry rapping, and I'm like, where Dane swam, and I'm like, you sure about that?
No, EJ's a legend.
Yeah.
Well, right on. Well, yeah, I'm definitely happy to work with you again, and I'll look forward to seeing what you put out. And best of luck, man.
Appreciate it.
Killer chatting with you guys.
Yeah, it was awesome. I was nervous because usually it's just me and Sam, and you're really our first major guest. And I usually don't get starstruck, but like kayaking means a lot to me.
Right on. I'll take that as a compliment. Appreciate it, man.
Alrighty. Have a good night, man. Thanks for being on.